Hey guys!
Hi, how are you? We are here to kind of add a little more content outside of the kitchen
Yes.
to kind of dive deeper into some of the topics that we've been talking about. One of the things we wanted to do in these kind of casual conversations is talk about nuance, and that's what this series is about. It's nuance, particularly around this idea of consent, nuance, and within sexual harassment and sexual abuse, nuance of the Me Too movement, and nuance of sexuality in general.
A lot of the gray areas.
Yeah, I know it's not a popular conversation to have because people get lost in nuance, or nuance sometimes deflates arguments.
Or is shaped by the individual participating in the moment.
Right. But they're important within the context, and I think if we can begin to understand nuance, we can begin to dive even deeper and have better discourse on all these topics. So let's talk about consent, right? That's today's topic.
Yeah.
So how do you define consent?
Well, for me personally, I think it's having someone inquire as to what I'm comfortable with, right? Even starting off with, even if someone sits down next to me and says, I want to fuck you, how do you feel about that? It gives me the opportunity to say, let me think about that for a minute, or yes, not, I want to fuck you, what's it going to take?
That happen often?
Yes. No, luckily I've had a lot of really good experiences with, not so much with women partners, but with male partners, when they've sat down next to me and said, you know, we've made eye contact across the room a couple of times, and they sit down and go, I really want to fuck you. I appreciated that straightforwardness so much. Generally, I'll say yes. Just because it's like, the problem that I've found, especially in hetero interactions, is this need on a man's part to woo me, or to pretend he's interested in me as a relationship partner sometime in the future. Like, no, don't fill me full of bullshit. What is it you really want?
But I think that's the lessons that we're taught. I think that's how how men are socialized, that we're supposed to chase, we're supposed to woo, we're supposed,
and some of us don't want to be wooed, or not wooed by everyone.
Right.
And I think that's missing in a lot of the consent conversation. Is not everyone is someone you want to marry. Not everyone is someone you want to have a relationship with. Every relationship that you have is different, just like every friendship you have is different. Some people you want to be friends with that you fuck. Some people you want to just fuck. Some people you want to have a relationship with. Some, at least one person in your life you might want to marry.
Yeah, but so in my research on hookup culture and casual sex, time and time again, well, first off, let me say, it's all on college students, so there's the problem there.
Yeah.
But in the research, it always talks about how women lose in this pursuit of casual sex because there's the underlying tone that every interaction, every sexual encounter, there's the belief that it should, or that you should feel that it should go somewhere, right? You always, in a
relationship sense or a sexual sense?
In a sexual sense,
okay.
That if you're hooking up with someone, there's that underlying feeling like this should go somewhere.
Oh.
And I think that's for a lot of people, that whenever you go on a date with someone, like you have that underlying tone that where's this going to go? You have that thought, right? That like, can I see myself with this person?
Right.
Or even if you hook up with someone, this idea of like, well, what are we? Or maybe you're a fuck buddy and you've been hooking up for a while, and you have to have the talk about where this goes. It's like, people are in such a big damn hurry to get absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, and the thing is why does it have to go anywhere? Why? That's the one thing that I have conversations with people often about as a non-monogamous person, is they say, well, you're going to want a relationship with each one of these people, and the answer is no. Generally, where we start is where we continue. We start off as friends that we're attracted to each other, we want to fuck. We stay friends that like fucking each other. Very rarely, for me anyway, does it have to evolve. It is what it is, and that's enough. And it doesn't have to be anything else, or grow, or whatever you want to call it.
And that evolution is an active conversation. It's not something like I have friends, like dude friends, that they'll start dating someone and they're like, well, I guess I'm in a relationship. Like they fell into it like riding their bike, you know? Yeah, I'm like, why is this not like this active pursuit or this active conscious thought? Both directions. Like if you don't want to be in this relationship, don't be. If you do, say so. If you just want it to be fucking, say so. It's okay.
Yeah. These unspoken assumptions. Yeah.
And that we as a society, because of the way it's constructed around relationships and even, you know, marriage as an institution, because that's evidently the goal of where we go, like casual sex and hooking up and things like that, are always lesser than. They're always suspect. They're not.
Especially for women.
Oh, yeah.
Right? For women, it's you are debasing yourself, or you're the used, chewed up piece of gum. Or however, especially abstinence-only programs depict women who are just interested in being sexual with people. They are somehow dirty or less than, and we see that even like with porn stars or other kinds of sex workers.
Right. You're actually seeing this too in a lot of the hookup culture. While we talk about the sexual double standard, right, that you're suggesting, there's evidence and a lot of it out there to suggest that there's actually a reverse sexual double standard. In that, well, it's kind of twofold. We have this egalitarian shift away from the sexual double standard, and then an underlying reverse sexual double standard. So the egalitarian shift is that both men and women are seeing that casual sex between them is okay, but it leans conservative. So people are saying it's okay, but not too much, or like, you know, a small amount. But then on the other side,
and are they defining this amount?
No, of course not. Of course not.
That's what
it's usually in relationship to their own sexual behavior.
Right.
And then the reverse sexual double standard, they're showing that men who are, because men are usually the ones, you know, condoned for this, right, for their sexual behavior, they're actually showing that men who have too much, there is apparently a too much, are seen as unfavorable. Like they don't want to be friends with you, or they get stigmatized by both men and women because of that egalitarian conservative shift. Right? So
so studs are only studs so much. And
then nobody wants to be friends with them.
They're basically what's the term I've heard online a lot? Fuck boys. Okay.
Which again, it is really interesting to see this weird conservative shift in relationship to sexuality. We often think that sex is liberating. I think sexual identity is becoming more liberated. But actual having sex, behavior is not. And I think that goes in a lot of what we're talking about here, and this idea of consent and sexual harassment and abuse is like we are seeing this shift away from that swinging 60s, 70s idea.
Well, in a lot of ways, the sexual revolution is being maligned. In some corners.
Absolutely.
Especially in the radical femme corners. The other thing, one other thing that I found, I gave a talk at a university a couple of years ago on cunnilingus, and it was just a lecture that I used a lot of art to depict various ways in which cunnilingus has been depicted throughout history in art, to a conversation between and this was a gender diverse class, but those who were queer left early because the conversation that ensued in that room, there was about 200 college students, I'd say a third left, was between the women and the men that were mostly het, who were like, the women were like, we're hanging up our slut pants because we're not getting any sexual satisfaction when we're hooking up. We feel like we're dumpsters to the guys, and they're not paying attention to our sexual needs. And there's a stigma there. We already have to deal with the stigma, and we feel that playing itself out when we're hooking up with guys.
Right, it's twofold. You deal with the stigma. So in that hookup, one thing I tell my sexuality class is like, no one is responsible for your orgasm except for you.
Right.
But you're right, it gets tricky for women because if you voice what you want, you're a slut,
Yep.
right? But if you
Or
don't,
he feels inadequate.
oh yeah, or he feels inadequate, so
Right.
it's all about him.
Right.
Or you don't get your needs met,
Yeah.
and hooking up in casual sex just,
It's no fun.
it's no fun.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is, really, off-putting, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So this idea of consent, right? We're scientists, right? So when you're thinking about consent, we often use, and then when we're doing studies in informed consent, this is like the analogy that I like to use,
Yeah.
that at any point in a study, in a research study, you can choose to participate or opt out of any activities without any ramifications
Yes.
or repercussions.
Yes.
Right? And that's essentially what I feel consent is your willingness to participate in any activity, in all activities or no activities, without kind of pushback. Right? So that's what it should be. But of course, consent between two people is not a scientific study. I mean, it's some exploration, which is fun, but it's not a scientific study. Even though
Let's
people
frame all sex as science.
right, yeah, all sex is science, except for people that I hook up with when they find out that I'm a sex researcher, they immediately assume what I'm doing with them is,
Really?
is research, right? I'm like, I'm seeing how far I can get my penis in your ass. Yes, that's research.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and we need to have a conversation about pleasure, at some point.
So with this consent between people, it gets a lot trickier because we have the consent kind of everyone agrees upon, this verbal consent, right? These, yes, I want to do this.
Yes. Which some people bristle at.
Yeah.
That's a turn off. Okay, why? Well, I want to be swept away. And when I hear I want to be swept away, I hear I want to be dominated in some form or another. So, yeah, thought I'd add that.
Right. So then that goes into our nonverbal consent,
Right.
which you can have nonverbal yeses and nonverbal nos.
How does one person identify whether or not it's a yes or no on the other person's behalf?
I think it's
I mean, that just seems rife with roadblocks at the very minimum.
oh yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure it's really complicated. It requires some element of social intelligence and emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Like we always talk about, different types of intelligence, and those two are two that we don't really talk about as being important. So when you have people that maybe are lacking social graces and intelligence, that reading those nonverbal cues might be difficult. In addition to that, like there's some men or some people, we won't just say men, there's some people who just ignore them. Right.
I'll give you an example, the one I'm thinking of. You're laying next to someone, right? You've been cuddling for a while, and she's kind of like, let's slow down. And she decides, while she's on her back next to you, to raise her knees up and spread her legs open. Now, that could be interpreted a number of different ways. That could be interpreted as, get on top of me. It could also be interpreted as, my hips hurt, and I'm stretching. I think it's a lot more nuanced than even we're recognizing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think so too.
How would you read that unless you talk to the person and go, are you spreading your legs right now because you're stretching, or are you spreading your legs right now because you want me to climb up on you?
Right.
Is it then reasonable to assume that it's wise to come back to verbal consent?
I think so. I think going back to verbal consent, and so a lot of this, so let's preface, a lot of this conversation is in heterosexual context, between cisgendered folks, right? Because that's where a lot of this comes from. Now, I'm not saying that the consent isn't an issue for trans, queer, in the LGBT community at all. It very much is. But in this context, we're talking about a heterosexual situation between cis folks.
Yes.
I think I'm not going to speak for all men, but speaking as a man, you get in a lot of trouble in a lot of ways by assuming what other people are thinking, right? And I think everyone does.
Yeah, and
You
I
get a
would
lot of-
argue that trying to be a mind reader is going to be not at the minimum disruptive to any relationship, whether it's with your parents, with your friends, with your partner, or with your sexual partner.
Right, and right, that's what I was going to get at. As men, even in a heterosexual relationship, there is a lot of expectation of being a mind reader. Well, you should just assume. No, mind reading is done. No more mind reading.
Right.
It's not a thing.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
really, it can be potentially pretty destructive to any relationship.
Especially now, if you've been together for a long time, you can anticipate needs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
my
one
wife
thing.
ran out of peanut butter. She really likes peanut butter. I should go get peanut butter.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, like so-and-so's, I know they're hungry, I'm going to stop and get some food on
Right,
the way home.
right,
Or
right.
just doing it to be nice.
Right.
Like, that's one thing. But if you're, a lot of this consent stuff also is like when new people meet,
Right.
you know, and knowing the boundaries of when to touch someone, when to be sexual with someone, when to say certain things to someone, and
Though we want to add to that even in long-term relationships, it's important to, especially in sexual situations, to pay attention to what how your partner's reacting, because there's this assumption that in marriage, at least in het marriage, between cis people, that, well, the woman should just, well, she might not feel like it, but to keep the husband happy so he doesn't cheat or doesn't masturbate or whatever the tropes are, she might not be fully participating. And you see this drop-off of sexual interaction in long-term married couples. And not entirely, but some of that has to do with that the wife just, or the partner, the female partner, just stopped advocating for herself, or the husband / male partner assumed that there didn't have to be as much consent seeking.
right. Which actually brings us to kind of the big chunk of what we wanted to talk about today, is when seeking consent, whether it's within a marriage, right, within two individual strangers or fuck buddies or friends or something like that,
Right.
there is a context of threat that and fear, but nuanced.
Nuanced, yeah.
Threat,
Perceptive.
right,
Right.
that has to be kind of considered when talking about this. And when I say this, so this part of this conversation is for men, right? This is for a nuanced understanding of threat in relationship to dynamics between men and women in that sexual context. Because you have to understand, and we don't mean to remove the agency from women at all. That's not the point of this, but it'll feel like it. But that's not the point.
Not at all.
Again, this is for men, because one thing you have to understand is women from adolescence
Or younger. Yeah.
have been socialized to be weary of you.
Right.
Be weary of men, and that's increasing today. Like the discourse, and which I understand some of the concerns for men of like, I don't feel like I can talk to anyone.
Yeah,
Which
And you're seeing it generationally separating. If you have those that are 35, 40 and over, who are perplexed by the reactions to especially cis-het women under 30, who see men as a threat in almost all situations, where older women, we saw that with the Catherine Deneuve article, where they're just kind of like, these poor men, just humor them and let them flirt with you and touch you or whatever. You know, it's not that big of a deal. It's not a scary thing. They're just dumb.
right.
Right? And so you're seeing this sort of generational divide with respects to what level of threat men are perceived as.
So this is for men to understand that younger generations' view of threat of you in a way that maybe is nuanced that you don't quite perceive. And so with that kind of overarching notion that women are socialized to be weary of you, right, to be concerned about your presence, we have to talk about threat in relationship to consent. And one of the ways we can do that is talk about threat responses. Now, we know the big three threat responses are
fight, flight, and freeze.
right. So those are the big ones
Yeah.
that we always talk about. So whenever there's a sexual assault situation, like the Nziza or the Nzizasari situation, well, why didn't she just leave?
Why didn't she just leave?
And they talk,
or say no.
Or say no, right? And they want to chalk it up to this fight, flight, or freeze framework. But it's actually more complicated than that. And one of the places we can look to is a book called On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who talks about these threat responses in relationship to killing and
war.
And war.
Yeah.
But he actually, in the book, equates a lot of this to sexuality.
He does
too.
relate it to sexuality, which was a really fascinating diversion from the war aspect of how they could tie in together. And he has a follow-up book that we might want to explore in a future episode about
On combat?
Yeah, and on how sexual relations post-violent experience, right? Anyway, yeah.
So in this book, Grossman talks about that these threat responses that we're looking at are actually those three, the big three, are between species. So
Yes.
in a predator-prey scenario where you're fighting for your survival.
From a lion.
Right, from something trying to eat you.
Yeah.
But he says that we actually have different responses for within species.
Right. Interspecies.
Yeah, interspecies. That there is fight, flight, and freeze.
But there are two other ones.
But there's two other ones.
Right.
He says one is posturing.
Yep.
Which is
Well, you see that between let's use gorillas as an example. When they puff up and they pound their chests with each other and they make themselves look bigger than they really are, a lot of it won't often come to combat between the two because one will get scared off by the puffing up of the other one. And he found that in humans as well in wartime, that most people will fire their guns but not at a target.
right. So the sound of the gun was a form of posturing.
Yep.
Yelling was a form of posturing.
I think the rate of actual hitting someone with a bullet was like 23%.
Yeah, it was really low.
It was
Up
really
until
low.
like Vietnam.
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
really,
yeah.
really low.
Yeah. So that's one.
That's one. And the other is submission. So you're submitting to the will, that forceful will of someone else.
Right.
Which plays a role, we're going to talk about that here in a minute, plays a role in sexual dynamics, but we actually want to add one of negotiation, because humans we communicate with language, very complex language, which articulate thoughts and abstract ideas. So negotiation also falls in that too. Like you're at a bar and there's a threat coming at you, and say
a perceived threat,
and maybe you address it with a form of negotiation. So we had to change angles.
A little bit of camera change.
Right, so we were talking about that sixth response of negotiation.
Right.
Where you, like in a context where you are at a bar or something like that, and you're dealing with that threat, and you kind of circumvent it, right? You negotiate it. You don't run from it. You don't freeze. No. You don't submit to the will. You change their will, essentially, to a different outcome.
Yeah.
And in a sexual sense, you see this a lot. In where you'll have
right. So one good example is say two people are together and one is asking for some kind of sexual activity, and there's flirtation, but there's a little bit of hesitation on, let's say, the woman's part, and so she then says, well, I'm not sure what kind of mood I'm in, or maybe she wouldn't even say that. She would. I think in negotiations, she would say, well, why don't I just, give you a blowjob?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because then she's taking some kind of ownership, and perhaps in her mind, he won't get upset if she does that.
And that's usually the reason.
Right.
That's usually the justification. Well, I blew him because I didn't want him to get mad. I didn't want him to get upset. Right. Well, why does it matter if he gets mad?
Because violence.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that, again, so this is for guys. Understand that she's doing that so you don't get upset, because there's this possibility that your anger could be physical.
Right.
Because while we are evolved and civilized, we still have kind of a lizard brain that any confrontation, whether it can be in a completely irrational setting, like you're in a board meeting or something, or church or some shit like that,
Right.
and there's a confrontation, there's something in your brain that warns you that this could be physical. There
Right.
could be some physical aspect to that.
Well, and there's some science to support that. There was a study done by Dean Mobbs et al. Back in 2007 that the parts of the brain, when there's the perceived threat nearby, our brains shift in where they actually respond to these threats. So in the study, and I'll go ahead and read what's here, using an MRI machine, these scientists found that as the virtual predator got closer to these people that were in the study, the brain activity shifted from the ventromedial prefrontal cortex to the periaqueductal gray. And what that did is it lowered that person's perception that they can get out of this successfully without being hurt. Okay? So there's an actual shift in the brain, and that affects perception. So if someone feels that they are under threat, their confidence that they're going to get away unscathed lowers as that threat seems to be greater. So that might explain these negotiation tactics.
Right. So we're not saying that this is every situation,
No.
because there are some girls or some situations where the female really just wants to blow you, and that's fine.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, and we don't want to remove that agency from women in this context, like, as being a willing participant. But what men have to understand is, even within the context of consent,
Right.
There is the possibility of dealing with threat, or just however small. So when we're talking about, oh well, she gave me a hand job, I thought it was okay, and then she feels bad about it the next day, like that's where this might be coming from.
Right.
Though she agreed to do this on the surface
And seemed to consent.
right? That in fact, she was responding to that threat.
It was a threat response. Her negotiation was a threat response, right? And that again, like Josh was saying, that's not intended to remove agency from women. It's meant to point out that there might be ways in which people are responding to a male where that nuance is lost. Right? That, well, it's taken as a black and white. Well, she consented, so it must be okay.
Yeah.
Or maybe she suggested, well, how about if I just blow you? Or she doesn't even use that language. Well, how about if I blow you?
Yeah.
That could be that threat response.
Or she just doesn't.
First of all, we want to make very clear that we don't know. This is a sort of a new concept that we're exploring.
Right. This is just adding to the conversation, something to be explored, to talk about, to discuss. Right. And then in addition to that, too, going back to that other response of submission, where even submitting, even willfully going, or not willfully, we'll say going and having intercourse with someone who's getting that push, could be under duress.
Yes. It might not look like duress in the way that we've been taught duress looks like, the fight, flight, or freeze.
Right. So these
that person might not freeze. They might not try to get away.
But they might just go along with it to prevent future violence, or prevent harm to them.
And I think that's really important, especially like you were pointing out, that this is more for men to know that it's important that with that kind of awareness, men can now start to ask themselves, okay, is she saying yes because she feels under threat? And then there's opportunity for more active, ongoing verbal consent. Are you sure? And from my perspective, I mean, if I was a guy and I wasn't sure, I would probably back off. If it wasn't, I would imagine that I'm not a guy, but I would imagine that if she's not enthusiastic, I don't know, I would go, maybe she's not enthusiastic enough yet.
Yeah, but I think, just going back to what we were discussing earlier, I think there's elements of that cat and mouse game that's still around.
Yeah.
So even that, and this is where you get in that nuance of active consent, like yes, that's a solution. Active consent is absolutely a solution.
Right.
But also going through the mindset of moving away from the chased and chaser. Like, you got to get that out of your head that, I just push a little further. We'll play blowjob tug of war. I know dudes know that. I fucking hate that, right? Or I'm going to put my hand down her pants. Oh, nope. Yeah, you do this game like for an hour. Like, you got to stop doing that.
Yeah, because that's just wearing her down.
Right.
And you brought up a really good point when we had this conversation before, that, and I've heard this too, where guys will say, well, if I pull away and then I decide not to pursue her, what if she, goes to school next day and says, oh, he must be gay or something, or, he didn't,
he just wanted to fuck me or something.
Well, because then you back off, right? And you go, okay, well, I don't really feel comfortable here because I don't feel like you're really fully consenting, and I really wanted to be sexual with you. Then there's two options. Either she goes, oh my God, the next day is like, well, he didn't want me, or he changed his tune, and so he must be gay or something. Or the opposite was like, all he wanted to do was fuck me.
Right. Which, you just have to eat it. You have to suck it up.
Yep.
Part of this too, the other solution is having this proactive pursuit of sexual desire. Like, if you know what you want, go after it.
Yeah, just be straightforward about it.
And whenever I say go after it, I don't mean go out and just take it. I mean go out and get the consent, get the active consent of like, hey, this is what I want to do. Like you were mentioning, the guy walked over and he said, hey, I'd really like to fuck you.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not saying that's going to work every time.
No.
And you probably shouldn't do that with, your opening line with every lady. But, if you're with someone and it is starting to build into that and it's starting to get physical, or that's going to happen, be upfront and be like, hey, you know what? I'm looking for sex, or I'm looking for this. Like, and be, like I said, proactive about it. Also, women can be proactive too. And this is kind of a twofold for women and men. Like, women, are socialized from the beginning to say no, 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 and then they say yes in the context of a ring, right?
Yeah. That's the trope,
Right, that's the trope.
Yeah.
I'm joking, of course.
Right.
But, women can say yes, and it's pertinent for women that they actively say yes, not just kind of do it like my buddy in the relationship. Well, I guess we're going to fuck tonight.
Right.
No, be conscientious and active about it. And men, this is more important, and to other women too, that if a woman is proactive about what she wants, be okay with that.
Right.
That has to be okay.
And please don't. Well, and the other thing is remember that she might want to talk to you the next day, not because she's pursuing anything, but because she wants to be treated like a human.
Right.
Right. Just because that's a frustration that I've often had with lovers is, after we've had sex a few times, I don't hear from them until the next time they want to fuck, and it's like at some point you're going, in what way are you perceiving me here? Let's have a clear understanding.
Yeah, but
if it's just a fuck, at least be straightforward about that. Then I can decide whether or not that's still working for me or not.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
There's nothing wrong with the 3 a.m. booty call, but after a while it might be like, I'm kind of feeling, especially if sex isn't that great. It's so complicated.
Right.
It's so complicated.
But I think if that's the context of your relationship, then let that be the context.
Right.
Like, if you're only talking to each other to figure out when's the next time you're going to fuck, that's fine.
Right.
But if you yourself like that, but also want, it's not even wanting more. It's just wanting that extra piece of communication to like.
It's no fun, even if you just have a fuck buddy, it's no fun being the one that initiates conversation all the time. Because then you feel like you're just a hassle.
Sure.
You have someone you're fucking every once in a while, and then you send them a message after a couple of weeks. Hey, I went and saw Deadpool. It was freaking awesome. Did you go see it? And you don't get an answer, and then 3 weeks later you get a, hey, want to fuck? It's kind of like...
But I think that goes back to defining the parameters of, again, being proactive about defining the parameters of your interaction. If you're just fuck buddies, or if, say, you're just booty calls,
right,
like, and you don't want that extra communication,
You gotta be clear about it.
you got to be clear
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. No, that's actually, yeah.
And that goes for both sides. Like,
Right.
you know, women want that too. Like, you know what, I don't really want to talk to you. Let's just talk when we're going to fuck again.
Right.
And we only text each other to see if you're available.
Yeah, the best kind of conversation is when you do actually have that, where's this going to go conversation, and the other person says, what we have is what I can offer you.
Mm-hmm.
And please let me know if that's not going to work for you anymore.
Yeah.
Because then we shouldn't continue.
Right.
That's like clear and kind. Right? Yeah.
Right. So ultimately, you know, wrapping this up, like, men, no more chasing. Like, no more of this, like, cat and mouse game bullshit. If you're with someone, have your opinion or your desires vocalized. Women do the same thing. Your desires vocalized.
Right.
Have an idea of what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because...
And don't shame each other for it.
Right. And now, absolutely, you can change your mind in the middle of the in, like I said, the informed consent. You can switch it up at the middle and decide not to participate in activities.
Right.
And if that's the case, my opinion for men, or my kind of recipe for men, if you will, if she decides she's shifting gears and wants to slow down or stop, you end it. You get up, you leave. You put your pants on, you go back to the party, you go home.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
don't stick around.
don't
and go,
stick around.
Well, if I just touch you this way?
Right.
Right.
Just go.
Right.
And additionally, with this whole cat and mouse, like, pursuit thing, let's just end on this of, like, you don't really want to fuck someone that you have to convince to fuck you, right? Like, here, I'm going to put all this work to try to make myself appear that you want to fuck me, or to convince you to fuck me, and that's going to make me feel good about myself.
Yeah, it's way better when that person's just like, yeah, I really want to fuck you too.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us today in our conversation of nuance of consent.
Yes.
Hopefully you get something out of it, or at least starts a conversation about something new. And then
if you have any topic ideas, we're going to make this a regular thing that's in addition to the baking show. So we are happy to address any topic you might want us to explore.
Yeah, send us a message or comment below. And of course, you know, check out Baking Naked, because that's always fun. I like baking, and, you know.
We like naked.
Naked.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.
Bye.